Business Morning, reaching you live on Channels Television from Lagos. There's been a lot of hullabaloo as to who is the best economist, as a lot of responses, a lot of reports as to whether the central bank decision to restructure the currency is right or whether it's wrong. We'll be listening into a track up by our Governor, Lamido Sanusi, reaction actually on whether those who have been speaking about its move to restructure the currency is good.
You know, my uncle or my father, the former head of state, General Obasanjo, you know, I like Obasanjo. He's a very successful farmer, but he's a very bad economist. He stands up and, you know, he loves me, and he stands up and says that this higher denomination notes will cause inflation and impose hardship. I said, General Obasanjo did 20 naira. He did 100 naira, 200, 500, and 1,000. He has introduced more higher denominations in Nigeria than any head of state. And you see, and when General Obasanjo he did 100 in 1999. Then he did 200 in 2000, did 500 I think 2 years later, did what? And in that period, inflation was coming down. It was coming down because it was accompanied by very tight monetary and fiscal policies during his reforms. Now, for somebody who has gone through that, who has in business, to come and stand up and say introducing a higher denomination causes inflation. I don't know if somebody wrote the speech. I'm trying to see him, or if he was misquoted. Because if he actually said that, then he must be the single most important determinant of inflation in our history, given the number of notes he has introduced. We all know that you cannot have inflation simply because you produce a denomination if you don't increase money supply. It's basic economics. We all know it. And yet, we keep repeating the opposite deliberately, and people talk. And you wonder, what is the transmission channel between any denomination and prices? What?
Okay, and that was the central bank governor, Lamido Sanusi, reacting actually to comments by former President Olusegun Obasanjo saying that the 5,000 naira note may not be good for our economy at this point in time. Let's get more reactions, talking about reactions, from Muda Yusuf, who is here. Good morning, for joining us on the program.
Good morning.
You listened to that
I did.
comment.
I did.
What do you make of it?
You see, beyond what Obasanjo said, there had been all sorts of analysis on this issue. And in a sense, economics is becoming like soccer or sports, where almost everybody is an expert. You know, the lawyers are analyzing the economy, the engineers are doing so, religious leaders are analyzing the economy. And in the process, so much confusion and misinformation are created in the polity. Coming to this specific issue, I think there are two components of what the former president said. There is a component that has to do with the fact that the CBN is so heavily committed to fighting inflation. There's also the component that has to do with the currency restructuring, that the 5,000 naira note. So I will agree with him to a point. To the extent that we talk about excessive commitment to fighting inflation, tightening liquidity, certainly it has had a lot of adverse effect on businesses generally. Because as the CBN tightens liquidity, it has been doing that for over 6 months or more, the credit situation has been worsening. And businesses are almost virtually strangulated because of lack of credit. So the cost of credit has been increasing. Interest rate has been going from 25, even sometimes up to 30.
Let me just ask you.
Yes.
Now, would you do we make this conclusion that the currency restructuring plans or the mere announcement that the central bank will print 5,000 notes and other denominations in terms of having to coin some notes is already having effect on businesses? Is that what you mean?
No, that's not what I mean. I want to analyze what the former president said. And I'm saying that there are two issues he raised. There's the issue of the impact of the 5,000 naira note. There's the issue of the fact that the CBN is committed to fighting inflation. Now, to the extent that the CBN is so committed to fighting inflation, by tightening liquidity, is having an adverse effect on business. Because the cost of credit has been increasing, access to credit has become more difficult, and a lot of businesses are complaining. Now, on the point of whether the 5,000 naira note will cause inflation or not, of course, that is not an economic argument. I've heard that argument from various quarters. What causes inflation from the point of view of monetary policy is if we are taking steps that can increase money supply. There are two components of money supply. There is the cash component. There is the demand deposit component. So if there is any policy of government that increases the volume of cash or the value of cash or the value of demand deposits, then you can have inflation if output is constant. But in this situation, the fact that you are restructuring the currency has no impact on the volume of cash or the value of cash that you have in the system. Because what you are just changing is the components or the portfolio of currency.
In other words, the tightening of the liquidity that you mentioned is not called for. Is that what you mean? Because if they said the central bank is tightening liquidity and it's having adverse effect on businesses, I mean that there shouldn't be any need for the government, for the central bank rather, to tighten liquidity. The central bank has its reasons for doing so.
Okay. It has argued that it's doing so in order to fight inflation. It's doing so in order to make sure that exchange rate is stable. So for those critical reasons, the CBN has insisted that it has to continue to make sure that inflation is kept in check and exchange rate is stable. That is the argument of the CBN. I know the nature of economic policy is that there are always costs and benefits. And what determines the ultimate choice of policy is the balance between the benefits and the cost. The benefits, according to the CBN, is the fact that as it tightens liquidity, it's able to regulate inflation, maintain stability in the foreign exchange market, and also ensure that there's a growth in foreign reserves. But the cost of that to the economy is that businesses have difficulty in accessing credit. And that has been starving a lot of businesses, particularly the small and medium enterprises.
And we will get back.
You know?
We will get
so
back.
These are, but coming back to the issue of currency denomination. Now, there are merits and there are demerits. The merit, according to the CBN, which I also think is not out of place, is the fact that if you introduce higher denomination of currency, the volume of cash that you have to deal with will become smaller. And therefore, the cost of managing currency will be reduced. And the CBN has said it's going to save about 7 billion naira annually in the process. That argument we cannot ignore. We also have the fact that, okay, if you do this, what is the downside? Some of the fears that people like us have is that if you introduce higher denomination currency note, there's a risk of counterfeiting. Because it becomes more attractive.